The quiet of the suburban evening was a carefully curated illusion, a product of manicured lawns, freshly painted fences, and restrictive covenants. This gated community wasn't just a collection of houses. It was an idea, a promise of safety purchased at a premium, a place where nothing dramatic was ever supposed to happen. The air itself smelled of mulch and complacency. On this ordinary evening, that illusion shattered. A black woman, let's call her Commander Elise Vance, navigated her sedan to the opening gate. She was dressed in comfortable, casual clothes, her posture weary from a 12-hour day. Her mind was already inside her home, on the simple pleasures of silence and a glass of wine. She owned this property. She paid the HOA fees that funded the very sense of security now about to be weaponized against her. A man, burly and brimming with borrowed authority, stormed from the shaded HOA kiosk. His polo shirt, emblazoned with the security logo, was tight across his chest. His role was self-appointed in its intensity. He was the guardian of the gate, the enforcer of the mundane, and he had identified a threat. He didn't see a homeowner. He didn't see a tired professional. He saw a demographic anomaly. He saw a black face in a white space, and his bias, honed by a lifetime of stereotypes and a culture of suspicion, completed a narrative of intrusion where none existed. He didn't ask for her ID. He didn't request her registration. He escalated with a terrifying, instantaneous velocity born of misplaced confidence. He drew his firearm, leveling it at the driver's side window. His face was a mask of aggressive panic. "Stop right there. Don't you move," he barked, his voice cutting through the suburban silence. For a heartbeat, Commander Vance felt the cold, primal fear any human feels when staring down the barrel of a gun. But in the next second, a lifetime of training and instinct overrode panic. Her mind, a weapon sharper than any pistol, began its work. Her body, though seemingly relaxed, calculated the geometry of the situation in a flash. 5 seconds. That's all she would have needed. Second one, assess the weapon. A semi-automatic pistol, held with unsteady, adrenaline-shaken hands. Amateur grip. Finger on the trigger, not the frame. A catastrophic error. Second 2, environmental scan. The car is in drive. The window is down. His center of mass is exposed, leaning forward in his aggression. The distance, less than 6 feet. Ideal. Third second, plan to disarm. A sharp, upward strike with her left forearm to break his aim and trap the weapon against the window frame. Simultaneously, her right hand would seize the slide, immobilizing it, rendering the gun useless. Fourth second, execute the break. A vicious twist of her wrist would hyperextend his finger, forcing him to release the grip or suffer a fracture. The weapon is now hers. Fifth second, neutralize the threat. A disabling strike to the solar plexus with the pistol's grip, followed by a secure restraint on the pristine asphalt. The entire sequence unfolded in her mind, a flawless, brutal ballet. She could have done it. She should have done it. He was an armed, hostile aggressor who had initiated a lethal threat. But Commander Vance saw more than the gun. She saw the disastrous headlines, the internal affairs investigation, the trauma of taking a life, even one so recklessly offered. She saw the neighborhood children who might witness it. She saw the man's own terrifying ignorance, which, in that moment, was a greater shield than any body armor. Instead of moving, she moved her eyes slowly to meet his. Her voice, when it came, was not fearful or pleading. It was calm, cold, and carried the absolute authority of someone who has faced real violence and knows precisely how to control it. "You have exactly 3 seconds to lower your weapon," she stated, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Then you will look at the property deed in my glove compartment. And then you will call your supervisor and resign before I have you arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and unlawful imprisonment." The man faltered. The sheer, unexpected force of her command shattered his script. The gun wavered. The illusion of his authority crumbled under the weight of her real, formidable power. In that moment, he wasn't protector. He was just a frightened man who had pointed a gun at an FBI tactical commander and, for the first time, understood the terrifying precipice on which he stood. The man's badge was a cheap, polished alloy, the kind purchased online to lend a veneer of legitimacy to a role that required none. He was no sworn officer, no retired deputy. He was a middle-aged HOA employee. His authority derived entirely from a clipboard and a self-important attitude. His training, likely a cursory video on gate operation and neighborly etiquette. Yet, that night, fueled by a toxic cocktail of bias and bluster, he transformed from a gate attendant into a self-appointed arbiter of who belonged. He saw a black woman in a casual sedan, and his internal algorithm of prejudice flagged her as an anomaly. Without a second thought, he stepped into the road, blocking her path with his body, a performative act of bravery for an audience of no one. His hand went to his hip, drawing his personal firearm with a clumsy, unpracticed motion. He aimed it directly at her driver's side window, his knuckle white where it rested nervously beside the trigger. Inside the car, the woman's training instantly overrode instinct. While a primal fear surged, it was immediately captured and analyzed by a mind honed in high-stakes environments. Her breathing remained even. This was not her first time staring down a barrel. It was, however, perhaps the most absurd. She assessed him in a microsecond. The shaky grip, the poor stance, the wide, panicked eyes that betrayed his complete lack of control. He was every tactical instructor's worst-case scenario, an unpredictable, armed amateur. With a deliberate slowness that spoke of absolute control, she rolled down her window. The barrel of the gun was now just feet from her face. She met his wild gaze, her own eyes cool and unwavering. Her voice, when it came, was not raised. It was flat, measured, and carried a chilling calm that cut through his hysterics. "Is this how you protect residents?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a verdict. "Because I live here." The statement, simple and true, should have been enough to shatter the ridiculous tableau. Instead, it seemed to inflame his ego further. He barked orders, demanding ID, his voice cracking with the strain of pretending to be the hardened lawman he saw on television. He yelled as if he had cornered a dangerous fugitive, his performance a pathetic pantomime of authority. The irony was so profound it was almost cinematic. The woman sitting perfectly still before his trembling weapon was a federal tactical commander. Her days were spent planning and executing operations against transnational drug cartels, orchestrating the takedowns of armed militias, and navigating hostage situations where a single wrong move meant death. She had stood toe-to-toe with genuine, calculated evil. And now, in her own neighborhood, on a street dotted with sprinklers and children's bicycles, she was being held at gunpoint by a man whose greatest threat was probably an unchecked ego and a poorly trimmed hedge. She could see the panic in his eyes, the dawning realization that his script was wrong. The suspect wasn't cowering. She was analyzing him, her calmness becoming a mirror reflecting his own incompetence. He was playing cop, treating her like she didn't belong, while utterly oblivious of the fact that the person he had accosted possessed more real authority, training, and power in her little finger than he would ever know in his lifetime. He was not a protector. He was the very definition of a threat, a loaded weapon aimed by ignorance. The man's finger, hovering near the trigger, twitched with nervous energy. His breath came in shallow gasps, fogging the air between them. He was waiting for her to flinch, to cry, to comply with frantic pleas, the reactions he believed his authority demanded. Instead, he was met with a glacial calm that was far more terrifying. The woman's voice cut through his panic, not with a shout, but with a sharp, precise clarity of command given in a tactical operations center. It was a tone that brooked no argument, forged in moments where hesitation meant death. "Put your weapon down. Right now." Each word was a hammer blow to his crumbling confidence. She didn't plead. She didn't negotiate. She issued an order. "You have no idea who you are pointing that at." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was more than a warning. It was a promise of consequences he couldn't possibly fathom. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a dawning, cold dread. This wasn't going according to script. The fear he had expected to instill was now reflected back at him, tenfold, in the form of her unwavering authority. This was command presence, an aura of controlled power that cannot be faked, earned only in situations where life and death are balanced on a knife's edge. He hesitated, his arm trembling from the strain of holding the gun aloft. The weapon, once a symbol of his control, now felt like a lead weight, pulling him toward a precipice. Sweat rolled down his temple, tracing a path through his pallid skin. Keeping her eyes locked on his, the commander moved with deliberate, unhurried slowness that was both non-threatening and utterly confident. There was no sudden movement, no fumbling. She reached across the glove compartment, clicked it open, and retrieved not a weapon, but a wallet of black leather. She held it up, and with a practiced flick of her thumb, it fell open. The gold emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation caught the dying evening light, gleaming like a judgment. The shield was unmistakable, its weight and design speaking of federal authority that rendered his toy badge meaningless. Beside it, her credentials, her photo, her name, her title, confirmed a reality so catastrophic it short-circuited his thinking. Silence. The only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower and the frantic thumping of his own heart. The color drained from his face completely, leaving him a ghostly, sweating statue. The gun, forgotten in his hand, wavered and then drooped toward the ground. His arm went limp. In that frozen instant, his mind raced through the consequences. This wasn't just about losing his job or facing the polite scrutiny of local police. This was the FBI. This was a federal incident. He had drawn a weapon on a federal agent. Visions of handcuffs, federal courtrooms, prison sentences, and the utter ruin of his life flashed before him. He wasn't just harassing a resident. He had committed a felony against a highly trained tactical commander on her own property. The sheer, monstrous scale of his error was a vacuum, sucking all the air from his lungs. He stood there, exposed and utterly powerless, his illusion of authority shattered at the feet of the very real power he had been foolish enough to challenge. The gun was no longer a tool of control, but evidence against him, and the quiet suburban street felt like a holding cell. The pristine silence of the neighborhood was first broken by a single screen door slamming. Then another. Drawn by the prolonged standoff and the shocking sight of a drawn weapon, neighbors emerged from their homes, their curiosity quickly curdling into disbelief. Phones were raised, not to call for help, but to record the unfolding drama, a scene of suburban surrealism that would soon dominate local social media groups and text chains. They saw the HOA guard, a man many of them had waved to casually for years, standing ashen-faced and frozen. His previously puffed-up chest was now deflated, his gun hand hanging limp at his side. He looked less like a defender and more like a child caught in a terrible act. And they saw their neighbor, the quiet, professional woman from a few houses down, standing with an unnerving calm. Her FBI badge still held aloft not as a threat, but as a simple, devastating statement of fact. The footage was jarring. It showed a man paid to ensure their safety pointing a lethal weapon at one of their own. The story spread like a California wildfire fan by Santa Ana winds, jumping from private text to community forums to local news. The initial shock gave way to a boiling, collective outrage. The FBI commander, true to her training, did not make a citizen's arrest. She had the authority and every right to, but her goal was justice, not street-level retribution. She holstered her credentials and made a calm, professional call to her field office. This triggered a formal federal investigation. Not into her, but into the armed individual who had assaulted a federal agent and the organization that had empowered him. The fallout was immediate and severe. The Homeowners Association Board, once concerned only with paint colors and lawn height, found itself in a full-blown crisis. They scrambled, issuing mealy-mouthed statements about an isolated incident and a full internal review. Emergency meetings were called, where furious residents shouted down board members. They had paid high fees for security, not for reckless vigilantism that endangered their families. The very concept of their gated community felt violated, not by an outsider, but by the person they'd hired to keep them safe. In hushed tones, on front porches and in grocery store aisles, another, more uncomfortable narrative emerged. Some neighbors reluctantly admitted the guard had always been a little overzealous. They shared stories of him aggressively questioning delivery drivers of color or following teenagers walking home from school. He had a reputation for treating the neighborhood like his personal fiefdom, a role he played with a badge and a gun that everyone now realized had no official oversight. The question echoed through the community with a newfound urgency. How could a man with no proper training, no real authority, and clearly biased judgment be allowed to patrol their streets with a loaded weapon? As for the commander, she became a figure of quiet awe. She did not give interviews or seek attention. She went to work. But her story, once told, took on a legendary quality. The word spread. The woman he had tried to intimidate wasn't just an agent. She was a tactical commander, one of the most highly trained operational leaders in the Bureau, a woman who regularly briefed the director. The profound, almost cosmic mismatch between the threat he perceived and the power he actually challenged became the central, humiliating lesson to tale. A stark warning about the perils of prejudice and the dangerous arrogance of those who play cop without any of the discipline, training, or accountability. This story is more than a sensational neighborhood scandal. It is a chilling microcosm of the dangers that fester when unchecked bias is armed with a weapon and a badge, however unofficial. The HOA guard's fatal error was not merely a mistaken judgment. It was a catastrophic end result of a mindset that equates different with dangerous. He genuinely believed he was a community's protector, a vigilante hero in a polo shirt. But his actions revealed the ugly truth. He was not guided by duty but by prejudice. He saw a black woman in a car in his brain, conditioned by a society steeped in stereotypes, short-circuited past reason, and directly into a lethal threat assessment. That instantaneous, bigoted assumption that she was an intruder in her own home transformed him from a would-be guardian into the single greatest danger on that safe, manicured street. Yet, the story's power lies not in the guard's failure, but in the commander's profound response. In the face of a lethal threat, her greatest strength was not her ability to inflict violence, but her supreme discipline to avoid it. This is the story's crucial counter-narrative. That true power is often expressed through restraint. Every second of her training screamed for her to neutralize the unpredictable, armed amateur pointing a gun at her face. She could have ended the confrontation in a heartbeat, and any court would have deemed it justified. But she understood that escalation would only confirm a cycle of violence and fear. Instead, she wielded a more potent weapon: impeccable calm, authoritative command, and the undeniable truth of her credentials. She chose to de-escalate, to educate through shock, and to ensure accountability through the system, not the street. Her discipline didn't just save his life. It exposed the entire rotten foundation of his actions. For the community and for anyone who hears this story, the lesson is dual and indelible. First, it is a stark warning against the poison of presumption. It screams that judging by appearances is not just ignorant or rude. It can be deadly. The person you dismiss, fear, or assume doesn't belong might be the very individual operating at the highest echelons of service and sacrifice. The commander's identity as a protector of the nation was invisible to the guard. All he could see was the color of her skin. Secondly, the incident forces a painful but necessary reevaluation of what real security means. The community learned that a gate and a gun are worthless. In fact, they are counterproductive without wisdom, training, and accountability. They had outsourced their sense of safety to a man whose primary qualification was a willingness to play cop. And in doing so, they had inadvertently welcomed the very threat they sought to keep out. The guard wanted to flex a cheap imitation of power. What he received was a masterclass in the real thing, and a facing of ultimate accountability. This wasn't just about a drawn gun. It was about a drawn line. It was about the respect every individual deserves and the devastating cost of prejudice. It revealed the shocking paradox that sometimes the people hired to protect us, those empowered by our fear and our fees, can, through their own bias and incompetence, become the ones who put us most at risk. True safety, the commander demonstrated, doesn't come from a weapon. It comes from wisdom, restraint, and the unwavering commitment to see the humanity in everyone, especially those we have been taught to fear.